What's up, my memory masters? Let me ask you a question. Have you ever been reading through a book, you get to the end of it, and you think, how much do I actually remember this book? Or maybe you think, I barely remember anything. Have you ever wanted to be able to memorize huge amounts of information from a book? Well, if you have, then you're in the right place. So if you like this content, please make sure to like and subscribe, share to anyone that might help, and also please make sure to leave some comments and ask some questions for me to get back to you. So let's get into it. Now, the book I'm going to be using today to demonstrate is going to be Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss. And if you haven't read this book, I'd highly suggest it. It's one of my favorites of the entire year. Now, the first thing we're wanting to do when reading a non-fiction book is to realize how much we actually want to memorize and remember. Because you don't need to take in every single piece of information from every book that you ever read. It would be highly impractical. Maybe you're in a part of life where you need a certain piece of content from the book. Maybe you're looking for an answer. Maybe you're only looking for a few key points to maybe tip that scale of ideas into understanding. So with that said, the first step is to do some quick math. I have a general rule of thumb where I want to memorize between 3 and 5 key concepts or ideas within a chapter. So say the book has 10 chapters, well then it might be between 30 and 50 pieces of content. Now with that said, I can start setting up a couple of memory palaces to be able to host that information. Now this video isn't going to be on how to create memory palaces, that will be on my somewhere else in this channel. So I'm just going to assume that you already know what a memory palace is and how to use it. This technique is probably the most powerful technique to be able to recall information at will. But the memory palace is the king of memory techniques. So in our example of 10 chapters and 30 to 50 pieces of information, we want to set up 30 to 50 spaces in memory palaces. And this is before we even start reading the book. Now the next step is we actually want to grab the book. We want to start looking at all the paratext. So different titles throughout the back section. We want to look through the table of contents, an index. And at this point, your brain is going to start asking questions. The purpose is to start exposing your brain and to start getting curious, because curiosity forces you to be focused and also keeps you engaged and helps you to learn. You don't always have to read a book from the beginning to the end. In fact, when it comes to especially non-fiction books, you don't really need to do that at all. What I like to do is I check out the table of contents and see which part seems the most relevant to me right now, or I can read through the whole thing if it seems like more of a storyline. But a book like this, it's not necessarily much of a sequential story the whole way through, but it has a lot of key concepts that do build on each other. So it is kind of important to understand where he was coming from in the beginning to the end. But for this book, I like to read through chapter by chapter, and I will start with the conclusion of a chapter. And this book is a really good example because at the end of each chapter, it has key lessons and conclusions. So we want to go straight to the key lessons and read through them. And what this is going to do is start getting your brain to pay attention to these specific pieces of information throughout the chapter. So your brain is essentially filtered already and primed for the information that we're looking for. And if you do look at the key lessons, there's generally around 5 or 7 pieces of information here. But my rule of thumb is between 3 to 5 pieces per chapter. So then I can pick out the 3 to 5 pieces of information at the end of this chapter even as things that I want to be able to memorize after. So now as we are going through our chapters and we're reading, we can write down all the key concepts and things that we do want to memorize afterwards. And then after we read the chapter fully, we can then prioritize and filter out stuff that isn't really that important. And then what we have left are going to be the things that we put into our memory palace. So step number next. If you want to, you can organize these pieces of information to memorize within index cards. You can use different folder systems for different books in your laptop or your iPad or even your phone if you really want to. But make sure that you have it categorized so that you have the information there whenever you're finished with it. Because that way, if you do kind of mess up with the next step, then you have the information there ready to go anyway. So you can put more effort into remembering it for the next time. Step number next is we want to start putting these pieces of information inside of our memory palaces. So we want to make sure to use as much vivid imagery, rich detail, action and emotion when we're adding this information into our memory palaces. Because the more vivid and actionable and crazy and weird your images are, the more likely you're going to remember them long term. So make sure to be okay with putting time into this step. The more that you are able to put time into actually setting up your pictures and images in your memory palaces, the more likely you're going to remember long term, and the less recalls you're probably going to have to do as well. Now, step number last. We want to remember the information. Make sure to set some time to actually mentally recall this information over the coming days and weeks and even maybe months. Because as we know, we need to space out the repetition and continue to recall the information for it to strengthen those connections in the brain and become a long-term memory. So make sure to block out some time in the coming weeks to just think through your memory palace. Maybe you can even think about your memory palace when you're in the shower, maybe when you're going for a walk. The great thing about the memory palace is it's kind of like having mental notes that you can take with you no matter where you go. So there's no excuse not to recall the images. So let's go through it again. We want to decide how much information we actually want to remember from this book. Maybe between 3 to 5 pieces per chapter is a good rule of thumb for me. Maybe yours is going to be different. We want to look through all the paratext. Then we want to read through the conclusion first, and then read through the chapter, write down the information that we actually want to memorize, and then filter through to the highest priority ones at the end. Then organize them. Organize them into index cards or into folder systems within your phone, laptop, tablet, whatever you got. And then turn that information into pictures and assign them into your memory palace using vivid, crazy images. And then make sure to use spaced repetition and recall the information over time. So there you have it, an easy strategy to be able to remember huge amounts of information from whatever book you're trying to learn. And as you start getting better and better at this, you're gonna realize, wow, I've turned into a sponge essentially for books. So if you are enjoying this content, please make sure to like, subscribe, and share, and comment below. Let me know what you think about this sort of technique and this strategy, what you would like to hear on this channel. I'm all ears. Anyway, until next time, I'll see you next time, and peace out.